Hello there, friends and neighbors. Thanks for coming back to my channel. This is me, Stella Hendricks, and today we are going to be talking a little bit more about why I do not super love Peter Bogdanovich. So I'm assuming you're familiar with the story of Dorothy Stratten. She's one of my favorites of, I call them my starlets and harlots. Fascinating and scandalous people who have really compelling stories that I like to learn more about and to retell, and I just find them very interesting and inspiring. Dorothy's pretty much top of the list. Well, I do not super love the guy who she was dating at the time of her demise. He seemed like okay in the story, and then he wrote this book that I don't love. And then he went on to do other things that I really don't love. So let's dive into that, shall we? Let's hear all the gossip and all the tea. This is Rolling Stone from 1984? 86. This is 1986. And I love that it has this interview with Bruce Willis, because in this movie with Bruce Willis is Sybil Shepherd, who was the original girlfriend of Peter Bogdanovich. So it doesn't really have anything to do with this particular article, but I just thought that was an interesting little tie-in. The small little world of Hollywood. Okay, so I'm gonna read this article, which is actually about Hugh Hefner a little bit more than it is about Peter Bogdanovich. But it's very interesting. So, here's my, might need this. Hugh Hefner gestures with a sweeping motion of his arm at the moonlit landscape of his 5-acre backyard. See if you can get a sense of this, he says. 4 baby ostriches scamper near dark pools where muscular Japanese koi teem below the surface. A tethered monkey crouches at the base of a tree. Silhouettes of hulking macaws on tall perches mark the horizon. A suit-clad security guard carrying a walkie-talkie is barely visible in the shadows. Hefner's velvet slippers and the cuffs of his black satin sleepwear soak up dew as he gazes at the glistening expanse. He inhales and exhales deeply. The 59-year-old is high on property and wildlife. Then he turns to his girlfriend, Carrie Lee, who turned 22 the week before. She is talking to a journalist. The two are seated on lawn furniture bathed in yellow light from a leaded window. Carrie is wearing a lavender dress of spandex-like fabric with a deep V cut down to her navel. The garment is held together with a succession of black bows. That sounds so 1980s. Her long black hair is teased and curled in abundance around her face and shoulders. Hefner bends down, his face between his lovers and the journalists, and he buries his nose and lips in Carrie's hairline. I love you, he says in a muffled stage whisper. Hefner, who boasts he has lived his life in a state of perpetual adolescence, will be 60 next month. In the past year, which has shown him the greatest emotional extremes of his life, he has survived a major stroke, fought a $5 million slander suit brought by a 16-year-old girl, and suffered some of the worst press of his career. It is Hefner bashing season, and journalists are launching their cleverest stylistic barbs at this target. Blows against the empire. Playboy publisher Hugh Hefner created one of America's most successful magazines out of his adolescent fantasies. Today, some people are saying that his dream is all wet, by Hillary Johnson. Hefner and director Peter Bogdanovich left in 1977, were good friends until Bogdanovich accused the publisher of forcibly seducing the late Dorothy Stratten. Hefner, in return, accused Bogdanovich of molesting Stratten's teenage sister. In the end, the feud left Bogdanovich bankrupt and Hefner triumphant, enjoying his life in the Playboy mansion with his new flame, 22-year-old Carrie Lee. Also, why do they have this picture of Hugh Hefner in here? Probably because he's looking at her boobs. Hilariously. Okay. Sorry, there's no picture on this one, just lots of words. Show me this. Oh, I must have missed something. At this target, who never moves from one spot. His 6-bedroom English tutor in Holmby Hills, Los Angeles. His whole lifestyle on paper resembles nothing so much as a study in terminal depression, wrote a young British writer recently, an observation that reflects the disillusionment with Playboyism that Hefner's constituency of youthful males increasingly exhibits. Admiration and envy during Hefner's golden years, the Chicago days as he calls them, have given way to general distaste. The malaise has spread to the company. The empire Hefner built on what he calls his adolescent dreams and what many would call the commercial exploitation of naked women is teetering on the brink. Revenues have dropped nearly 50% in the last 3 years. Readership of his magazine has slackened from a high of more than 7 million a month in 1972 to 4 million today, and his colonial outposts, the Playboy clubs, are a disaster. The real reason that Playboy started declining in the 80s has a lot more to do with the fact that their gaming license was, in my opinion, very unfairly revoked. And so all of that money that they were getting from the casinos, they were now no longer getting. It's not because people woke up to the evils of Playboy and naked women, but because they had their money jerked from them, obviously. Like, people... I can tell that this journalist has a certain story that they want to tell, and no matter what story it is they find when they go to interview, they're going to tell the story that they wanted to tell from the beginning. Reminds me of someone. Anyway, it appears the emperor has no clothes, and hardly anyone is afraid to say so. But Hefner is, on this night and in the days to come, in a celebratory mood. His good vibes are as maddeningly palpable as those of a recent life enhancement course graduate. He's a walking juggernaut of human potential. He has triumphed in the most bitter battle of his life, a quarrel he admitted was just so bad taste Hollywood that it sickened him, yet compelled him to fight on, even against the advice of his closest associates and his cherished daughter, Christy. That's right, she was the CEO at the time, wasn't she? I'm not interested in hurting people, he had thundered in the white heat of battle. I'm interested in getting back my character, getting back my good name, such as it is. It's rather important to me. And tonight, it is clear that in Hefner's mind, good name and character are quite recovered. 2 miles from Hefner's property, a 4-minute drive along Sunset Boulevard, lies the vanquished, Bel Air resident of Peter Bogdanovich, the movie producer who made films like The Last Picture Show and Paper Moon, whose career is considered to have sparkled and then lost its radiance, didn't really stand a chance. I have strong opinions about the writer of this article. Bogdanovich cast the first stone, but unlike David, he failed to slay his Goliath. He just made him mad. The claims and counterclaims of their feud cut deep, right to their masculine souls. Bogdanovich accused the most famous playboy of the Western world of having to rape a playmate, the late Dorothy Stratten, to get sex. But Hefner would insist, I am, publisher of Playboy or no, a very shy man, and I could no more force myself on a woman, psychologically or physically, than could the man on the moon. Come now. He in turn accused born-again feminist Bogdanovich of child molestation a la Roman Polanski. The director, Hefner announced at a well-attended press conference last spring, seduced Stratten's then 13-year-old sister as a pathological replacement for Stratten soon after her death. I 100% think that he did, and I'll tell you more why I think that coming up. The two men have not spoken for 5 years. One of their last conversations occurred when Hefner called the director to tell him Stratten, Playboy's Playmate of the Year, who was living with Bogdanovich, had been murdered by her husband, who then turned the gun on himself. Their final words of condolence were exchanged at Stratten's funeral at the Westwood Cemetery, where the 21-year-old Canadian was buried near Marilyn Monroe on August 22, 1980. Afterward, Hefner remembers, Peter retreated into editing They All Laughed, the movie Bogdanovich made with Stratten shortly before her death. What that must have been like, looking at the moviola, cutting those images, it must have been absolutely overwhelming, he adds in a moment of empathy. 4 years later, Bogdanovich emerged as a feminist with all the fervor of the newly saved in his book. You got that right. The Killing of the Unicorn, Dorothy Stratton's 1960 to 1980. He had embarked, in his own words, on months and years of investigation, during which he found out more and more about Hefner's role. If I had to confront my own responsibility, the director wrote, there was no way to ignore his. Unicorn was a passionate account of Stratton's rise at Playboy, Bogdanovich's love affair with her, and her murder. Mostly, it was an indictment of what the author felt was the exploitative nature of Stratton's relationship with Playboy, and especially with Hefner, who, Bogdanovich wrote, forced himself on Stratten in his notorious jacuzzi grotto the first night she spent in his house. The director believed that Stratten had married the man who would kill her to protect herself from the wolves at the mansion. That is just the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard, and I am 99% sure that Paul Snider specifically told Dorothy to go ahead and sleep with Hef if he wants to, because you got to get to the top that way. I'm pretty sure where did I read that somewhere too? I'm going to find out where I heard that, but where I originally heard that. But honestly, this guy and how he treated Dorothy and his other girls, he was a pimp. What will a pimp tell his hoe to do? Anyway, ridiculous. The wolves at the mansion. Bogdanovich's fury is especially comprehensible once you grasp his feminist sensibilities. Oh, by the way, I'm sure that Bogdanovich was not one of the wolves up at the mansion, because he is such a feminist and he just loves women, as he'll be sure to let you know. And so it's weird somehow that Bogdanovich had such a bad reputation at the time up at Playboy that even he admits the other playmates told Dorothy not to call him back because they said he had a bad reputation. Now, how does one get a bad reputation at the Playboy Mansion, pre-AIDS Playboy Mansion? How would a guy get a bad reputation with the girls up there? Certainly not by being one of the wolves at the mansion. She's such a hypocrite. I so hate him. Anyway. Bogdanovich's fury is especially comprehensible once you grasp his feminist sensibilities. He buys the continuum between centerfolds and axe murders. The notion that when women are presented as passive receptacles of male pleasure, sexual pleasure, anything can and will happen. And what trivializes women can kill them too. That also reminds me of someone recent. Ridiculous. If the pornography mentality killed his girlfriend, then isn't the granddaddy of the genre, Hugh Marston Hefner, culpable too? Masters of imagery, manipulators of fantasy. Cat, what the fuck? No. Hefner and Bogdanovich drew on their strengths. Theirs was an escalating battle of words and images fought on the airwaves and newsstands. Ultimately, it was a war of public relations, except that Hefner's PR machine was so much richer and more practiced than his adversaries. Even their truce was a public relations choreography. Both sides toured with the idea of a public show of amicability that should take place on the 5th anniversary of Stratten's death. That would be an ideal hook, where these two great men could come together, basically kiss and make up, postulated Hefner's executive assistant. Maybe we could hold a joint press conference at Dorothy's gravesite, Hefner had remarked in a moment of sarcasm. In the end, an official settlement came with the issuing of press releases from each side. Few appeared to care. The fireworks are over? Too bad, seemed to be the reaction of the Hollywood press. The fight had been so much more fascinating than its resolution. What was ignored was that hardly anything had been resolved. Whether anyone had been raped or seduced, for instance. Stratten's still grieving family was left bereft of justice or compensation as it was after her death, and Bogdanovich was on the verge of bankruptcy. Yes, darling. Can I help you? Hefner is, by now, an icon. His satin pajamas and 10-ounce Pepsi bottles are American kitsch, like Elvis's ducktail. Myths take shape around him, a few of which he willingly fosters, such as the number of stars on the cover of his magazine symbolizing the number of times he has slept with a playmate inside. In fact, in recent years, Hefner has become less involved in the selection of playmates. A middle-aged woman photo editor, Marilyn Grabowski, selects the candidates. Hefner okays them, sometimes 6 at a time, at infrequent editorial sessions. On the eve of his 60th birthday, the eternal adolescent finds himself struggling with conflicting imperatives: the need to ensure his good name and the need to live up to his reputation. He wants it both ways, and he's frustrated by a repressive, hurtful society that refuses him that privilege. Yeah, me too, because you can't be like really sexy and empowered therein and have a good reputation, can you? 1980s. What a time. There has never been a casting couch connected to Playboy, he will say in a moment of annoyance, although it would be one of the greatest temptations of our time. That is not entirely true. I do believe that you didn't have to sleep with Hef to get in the magazine, but I think if he wanted to sleep with you and you turned him down, your chances of getting in the magazine just drastically dropped. And that's kind of a casting couch there, Hef. I don't think he should have slept with any of the girls while they were in his employ. I think that crosses an ethical line. Anyway, the people who write about me are notorious for that kind of phenomenon, which is not to say I have not been romantically involved with a number of playmates over the years. I have been. But I would say that the father kind of relationship is the rule rather than the exception, and has been the rule for the last 30 years. The exceptions have been rather dramatic. Last year, a former bunny told the Justice Department's newly formed Mies Commission on Pornography, oh my god, which Hefner characterizes as a dog and pony show promoting sexual McCarthyism, sounds about right, that her group sex experiences with Hefner and his cronies in Hefner's bedroom ultimately caused her severe emotional distress and turned her into a lesbian. Oh my god, okay. Oh, sorry everyone. That was shocking. Now she is a born-again Christian. Oh boy. Oh, this woman is it doesn't give a name, but she sounds like a wild one. When Hefner is asked if the events she described in his bedroom occurred, he replies that he certainly recalls orgy episodes, but that he cannot remember specifically the woman. If she was there, it was because she wanted to be, he said, adding with tempered but unmistakable pride, "Believe me, there were a lot of people who wanted to be there." Bogdanovich's attack had myth-shattering connotations for Hefner. In Hefner's universe, he is to sex what Martin Luther is to race. Months before his triumphant stroll down his private Eden, he sunk into the threadbare couch of his library, his shaggy head framed by a shiny bust of Barbie Benton from her crown to her large pink nipples on the windowsill behind him. I love that bust. That thing is hysterical. "I have lived rather a full and wonderful life," he says. It has certainly involved a great deal of sexual adventure, and it played a very real part in what came to be called the sexual revolution. But I do not exploit human beings. As the sunlight dapples the room's interior, he seems to almost equate the sexual revolution, which he believes he spawned, with the founding fathers' deeds. To say the sexual revolution didn't work is like saying democracy didn't work, he says, as if the freedom to sleep around is as integral to the nation's functioning as the Voting Rights Act. Yes, that is correct. It is. Oh my gosh, this writer is something. Bogdanovich's book, far from giving Hefner his due, cast him as a Walt Disney of homogenized pornography and a depraved Machiavelli in his relationship with Dorothy Stratten. Playboy, the director said, turns every girl next door into a hooker. Yeah, Bogdanovich says a lot of nice things. Bogdanovich charges and insinuations cut so deeply when those of others have not, Hefner implies, because they impugned his heartland-bred integrity. I'm a Midwestern boy, he says, a very all-American kid who was raised by farm people in Nebraska, by Puritan Protestant parents. I've been very capable in dealing with the controversy of Playboy over the years and even reveled in it. But once it turns into something very personal. All right, 138. Something that questions my character is potentially devastating to me. Unicorn, Hefner believes, would have gone wanting for a publisher and an audience in another era, particularly the 60s. Oh no, it would not have. Everyone wanted to read that book. This has never been a pissing contest for me, he says, his voice loud with emotion in the still room. This has been a matter of my trying to protect myself from the wildest kind of character assassination that happens to fit into the public prejudices of our time. Purveyors of those prejudices are the anti-porn, anti-sex feminists, yeah, I call them feminazis, and the former Playboy minions, a bunny and a playmate who have taken up testifying before the Meese Commission. If Hefner's embattled state of mind, in Hefner's embattled state of mind, Bogdanovich's book became indistinguishable from criticism leveled by his more orthodox tormentors, just as for Bogdanovich, Hefner's sexual theme park was merely another element of deranged woman-hating culture that included snuff films and gang rape. Ultimately for Hefner, refuting Bogdanovich was a Superman-style blow for truth, justice, and the American way, as well as the salvation of his impeccable self-image. I'm a caring guy, Hefner says, leaning forward in his satin nightclothes, his eyes narrowing, his brow furrowing in his need to be believed. I say it with great honesty. No one's more honest than someone who tells you how honest they are, though, huh? I think I am truly a much nicer person than I was 20 years ago. For me, not being seduced by success and power is important. When a cynic hears all this, a decade's worth of static beaver shots or the 995 Playmate videos come to mind. Why? Why do people hate women, sexy women so much? Why? Do they insist that women being sexually empowered and being sexy and showing off their sexiness is degrading to us? Why do people insist on this? It's fucking madness to me. Ugh, okay. Yet, Hefner's perplexity over the assault on pornography and his magazine in particular seems genuine. His faith that he is a force for good in the world is unwavering. All I'm really looking for, he says, staring intently into the eyes of his visitor, is for someone to communicate what I'm really like. This concern dominated a series of conversations in his darkened library over the summer. Just once he decided to meet outside, at a table near his pool, where the portly publisher of Screw magazine, Al Goldstein, was sunning himself in bathing trunks and smoking a cigar. Hefner seemed obsessed with setting the record straight. This is not Rashomon, I don't know what that is, he would insist, as the afternoon light waned and his staff, butlers, security guards, secretaries, cooks, toiled quietly in the air-conditioned daytime hum of his house. There are people who know what went on. When the manuscript first fell into my hands, Hefner recalled one day in late summer, I was absolutely stunned. I thought it was science fiction. The book said I had sexually harassed or raped Dorothy Stratten on the first night I met her at the mansion. I thought there isn't a possibility this is ever going to be published. I mean, Peter had gone absolutely bonkers. William Morrow, Bogdanovich's publisher, made few of the changes Hefner's lawyers asked for. Hefner even appealed to executives at Morrow's parent firm, the Hearst Corporation, claiming the book was defamatory. Morrow editors removed the word rape. Bogdanovich, meanwhile, set off on a far-ranging publicity tour, appearing on television, news, and talk shows, reiterating the ideas about Playboy pornography and Hefner that he developed in Unicorn. Yeah, he also went on that press tour to make sure everyone knew that it was totally not his fault that Dorothy Stratten had been brutally murdered. It had nothing to do with the fact that he was taking her away from her husband. No. It's because she was in Playboy, and because Playboy is pretty much the same thing as murdering women, you know, they all fall into the same category. This fucking guy. Hefner kept silent, refusing to become ensnared in a one-on-one with his adversary. But he was more upset about the Bogdanovich book, a close associate said, than anything to ever befall him, including a federal drug investigation of the 70s that ended in the suicide of Bobby Arnstein, a former lover who worked for him as a secretary in his 70-room Chicago mansion. And he was infinitely more concerned about Bogdanovich's allegations than he was about the sliding fortunes of his corporation. At the beginning of every day, we meet with him every day for anywhere from a half an hour to several hours. We would have a conversation about this book, the associate said. I felt he was overwhelmed by it. Hefner was as repulsed by the book's motif as by its charge of forced seduction. When people read the death of Dorothy Stratten, they shook their heads and talked about the eternal triangle. It was the age-old story. Play with explosives and they blow up. Even I believed it, as the only living member of that triangle. But as I tried to find the truth, I discovered the fourth side, hidden and dark. Eventually, there'd be no doubt in my mind, if the shadowy Hefner side of the pyramid had never existed, Dorothy would not have died. She could have dealt with Paul Snyder, a small-town pimp who first spotted and sold her, but she could not have handled the slick professional machinery of Playboy Sex Factory. Yeah, that's right. The literal pimp who was literally trying to pimp Dorothy was not the bad guy here, and it was Hugh Hefner and the naked pig. This is so gross. You're such a gross guy, dude. You read the book and you get the impression we're dealing with some kind of sleazy back alley, Hefner said, adding with characteristic naivety, as if Dorothy's relationship with Playboy had anything to do with pornography. I agree. I fucking agree. I'm sorry, women's bodies are not inherently sexual. Women's bodies are not pornography. That's correct. Oh my God. In truth, on every level, Dorothy was treated like an absolute queen here. Was he naked with her in the jacuzzi? That's true. It was in the early evening. And I'll tell you very frankly, I don't remember a whole lot about it. It's not unusual. It's not the kind of thing that one would think about, except for what happened later. His own relationship with the late Stratten was above rebuke, he insisted. In fact, he invoked a scenario of the shy young Canadian blossoming under his tutelage. His doting was insufficient, however, to save her from herself. Dorothy absolutely adored me, and I adored her. In my relationship with her, I gave a great deal and took very little. She, along the way, married a creepy guy who followed her from Canada. And if there's one thing you could say about Dorothy, it's that she had very bad taste in men. She, in fact, had a self-esteem problem and seemed to seek out these men. Her relationship with Peter was really just a neck-level variation on her relationship with Snyder. It's fucking true! Oh, that's true! Oh. Ah, my battery's dying! Oh, let's see if I can get through this. Variation on her relationship with Snyder. And the saddest thing that has happened since her death is that he has done the same thing that Snyder did. He tried to possess her in the same way. Amen. Had Germaine Greer or Kate Millett written Unicorn, Hefner might have been able to understand it, but Bogdanovich was instead a cigar-smoking buddy who, by his own admission, had spent a year of devastating promiscuity hanging out at the mansion. For Hefner, Bogdanovich's turnaround was so fantastic he could comprehend it only as a manifestation of mental illness. Here's a man who was into numerology, astrology, seeing magic implications in the lights that go on and off in his house, he said. We're talking Looney Tunes. Accordingly, Hefner, whose college major was psychology and who remains fascinated with the subject, hired a Chicago psychiatrist to draw a mental profile of Bogdanovich based on his book and Hefner's accusations. The psychiatrist who furnished Hefner with a 20-page report made Bogdanovich out to be very crazy indeed. The director's personality shattered to a severe and truly tragic degree after Stratten's brutal murder, the doctor wrote. Unable to cope with his rage, Bogdanovich projected it onto Mr. Hefner, a phenomenon the psychiatrist believes resulted from an Oedipal rivalry between Bogdanovich the son and Mr. Hefner the father. I believe that. The father chooses a perfect goddess-like beauty, and when the son has the hubris to woo and win the same woman, the father rises in a bloody rage and has the woman murdered in the most savage way. Oh my God. Hefner's consultant continued. Rarely has the Oedipal pattern been so undisguised. He added that Bogdanovich, who seemed driven to prove that Stratten loved no one but him and had a godlike purity and chastity, was able to perceive Stratten's involvement with the Playboy organization, which commercializes sex only in terms of conspiracy and bondage. In his sweeping prognosis for a patient that he has never examined, never in fact even met, the doctor, fair enough, the doctor surmised that treatment would likely involve hospitalization. If depression is the underlying disorder, antidepressants and possibly electroshock therapy would be considered. Hefner accepted the doctor's word as gospel and was particularly taken with his Oedipal interpretation of the struggle. I thought that was interesting too. There was something Bogdanovich was trying to capture through his pursuit of the female members of the family. That's right, and he kept doing it. In his mind, the other male figures were intruders, Hefner said, and the primary intruder, it turns out, was me. Okay, there's tons more, and we're going to keep reading it, but my phone is dying. So I am going to continue reading this. We're going to make a part 2. Thank you so much, friends and neighbors. We're going to continue this very soon.